Good afternoon. Welcome to the BET Budget Committee. I'm Leslie Tarkington. My colleagues, Leslie Moriarty, Jeff Raymer, and Andy Deuce. We're socially distanced for this meeting. So we have a shorter agenda for our last meeting of the term. And Jeff has asked for a minute to speak, and then we'll start with CC2 thereafter.
I was merely going to say a thank you. This will be my last budget meeting. I've been here for 10 years. There are times when people have to move on. 10 years was a long time to have occupied this spot, and I've indicated early on to my caucus that I didn't want to repeat for the upcoming term, and they've respected that. They're certainly a very capable people who will quickly take my place and forget that I was ever there. But I did want to say a thank you. I've enjoyed the time. All 10 years were with Leslie. Leslie Tarkington, not all of it as chair, but all of it with Leslie. And I've enjoyed the association with you, Leslie.
Thank you.
I'm not leaving the BET. I'll be back, but I just wanted to say this brief thank you and this adieu to you from this seat for the upcoming term. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy, do you want to speak? Is that what?
Okay.
I actually had some comments at the end, but Jeff asked
Okay.
But Andy, if you'd like to speak?
As is Jeff, this is Andy Deuce. I am also leaving at the end of my term here, but I've only been here for 8 months, not 10 years, so I don't feel quite so emotional, perhaps, as Jeff is. But I've enjoyed my time, and I wish everyone the best of luck going forward. Thank you.
I just want to thank Andy for his contributions. I know that we had some debates over the budget, but I think we always work through the issues rationally, and I appreciate all the effort you put into the committee. Thank you.
So we'll start with CC2. Do we have anyone from the Conservation Department, Roland? You just send her an email. Okay, fine. So shall we then move on and start with GEMS? Does anyone
want me to make a motion to move GEMS to the first item on the agenda?
And I second that.
Okay, so Leslie, seconded by Andy. And those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that's 4-0-0. So we welcome GEMS to our meeting today. And this is for GEMS, GM1, the release of conditions on their second half contribution from the town. That's $2,391,153. So Tracy Seatinger, would you like to begin and update us?
Sure. Thank you. We're happy to do our quarterly update on our second quarter, since we haven't seen you since July. At that time, when we came before you, we had just completed our accreditation process and review, and I'm happy to report that we did receive full accreditation for the next 3 years, which is the first time GEMS has attempted that, and we did achieve it. So we're very proud of that. We are only the second ambulance service in the state of Connecticut to receive that.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. Nationwide, basically only 1% go for it because it is an arduous process. It does require a lot of time. It took us about 3 years to go through all the steps and make certain that what we have been doing for 35 years for this town was exactly what we said we were doing. And so we were happy to be able to complete the process. And what I will say on how it helped me, being newer in this role, and how I think it will help anybody else. One day, maybe I will retire. And it provides, definitely not yet, it provides a bit of structure and guidance for all of us in this industry. So I did appreciate even though it was 3 years, I did appreciate the process. So we're happy to report on that, and we will update that and remain accredited from now until the end of I don't know when, the end of time, I guess. So let's talk about COVID. Why not, right? For this past quarter, our second quarter, our numbers were tremendous. Obviously, we all watch the news. We know things are trending in a different light. November, however, was fine as far as GEMS-related transports. We had one COVID positive patient for November. That's great news. So post-Thanksgiving, everybody decided perhaps to get together. Things are a little bit different now. We do have a new variant. Keep in mind, we'll always have variants. We've had 5 for December to date, through yesterday. So that's 5 COVID positive patients. So obviously, our numbers are ticking in an upward direction. All of our staff, thankfully, is still doing the very best that they can, following the appropriate PPE precautions, and no one has tested positive for COVID.
Andy, you want to ask a question now?
Yeah, yes, if I can ask a quick question, sorry to interrupt. Do you test all patients that come in your vehicles, or is this, you just happen to know these 5 were separately tested and you were made aware of that?
So we provide the EMS coordinator for Greenwich
Right,
Hospital.
right.
So every patient that we transport, we have access to for follow-up so that we can also, do training and learn more about what we saw and what the true findings were. So we evaluate every single transported patient. If we don't transport to Greenwich Hospital, which is a very small percentage, less than 10% of our patients, so perhaps they go to Stanford or the medical center, we reach out to those EMS coordinators and get that information. So we know 100% of our transport.
Okay, so for the 5 that you transported during the month of December, what percentage does that represent of all the patients that you've transported during that period?
I can't tell you the percentage off the top of my head, but we've transported 156 patients
Okay.
thus far in the month of December. So you could probably do the math better than I can. So we'll talk about, since transports, call volume was something that, has always been a consideration with us. The call volume did decrease as a result of COVID. This same quarter last year, we have seen a 10% increase in our patient transports, in our overall volume. That's still, when you compare it to pre-pandemic, it is still less than that, and it remains very inconsistent. So we can't specifically say, on average, we will be doing 20 transports a day. We are still inconsistent. Some days are 25, some days are 10. And we really have been trying to evaluate the drivers behind that. Simply cannot pinpoint anything specific, so, at this time. So for our last quarter, our second quarter of FY '22, our cardiac arrest save rate is 50%. So remember, the national average is just over 10%. Ours was 50. Keep in mind, our sample size is much different. That was out of 7 patients. 50% of those patients survived, walked out neurologically intact. That's amazing news for this town, and we can definitely attribute a lot of that to the system that we have in place, from our dispatchers to our first responders to our paramedics and EMTs, but also the lay people who are willing to activate the system and initiate doing CPR prior to our arrival. So overall, we tend to sit in the high 30s for a year, a 12-month period.
Okay, and that was out of 7 patients? So you had, was it 4 or 3?
Yeah, I don't have that piece of paper in front of me. That came from our EMS coordinator, so it's probably more like 45% or...
It's rounded.
Rounding. Yeah. And other things that we have done that people do talk about is Narcan administrations. It is still an ongoing issue. Fentanyl, we administered that 7 times this quarter successfully. All patients survived. The other thing that everybody, thankfully you guys approved was Station 4. However, it is not our construction project. We are very much involved in that. Andy Fox is leading that along with Alan Minnelli. And that construction did begin the week following Thanksgiving. So they are underway. We have a camera, we get to watch them work. So again, about 6 months is the time frame, is what they're telling me.
So by the beginning of the next fiscal year, July 1, you should be in your new quarters? Keeping your fingers crossed?
I am definitely keeping my fingers crossed on that. Maybe by the end of the summer, being realistic. And then if you haven't seen it around, there's an ambulance driving around that's lit up. So we're doing what we kind of call a friend-raiser. We did it for Halloween. We decorated an ambulance for Halloween. Brought it around to people who signed up. We started this as a result of COVID to just kind of get out in the community and have the kids involved in Halloween. So we did that for Halloween. We're doing that with a decorated ambulance for the holidays. We did that last weekend. We're doing it this weekend as well. So that's sort of where we are this quarter, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for the update. Jeff, do you have any question? Leslie?
No questions. I would, sorry. I would move that we recommend the release of the conditions, recommend to the full BET, the release of conditions.
So I'll accept that in a moment, but I'm going to call on Leslie because she had her hand up. And then
Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on your financials, that your training revenue went up significantly. Was that also, you think, just a COVID bounce back, or are you doing something different?
We're not doing anything different. So we did, every other year, we have Greenwich Country Day. We probably did 180 staff, trained them all in CPR. And then this past summer, our summer EMT course had 46.
Yeah, fully subscribed.
Yeah, double what we normally do. And I believe those are the main
Right.
drivers behind
If I
that.
could, I think we saw the opposite as when COVID hit, we pivoted to a kind of hybrid training where we did it via Zoom, but it still did practicals in person. And I think many more people were available to do training. So we actually saw our student enrollment kind of go up as a result of that.
Will you continue to offer training that way going forward? Is that one of the lessons learned that might be helpful?
Blended,
Yes,
yes.
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 Absolutely.
So it's
Interesting.
optional because certain people learn better in person and others, like the younger generation, seems to be able to handle Zoom much better than I would.
And also, just to comment, because you also, as usual, control your financials really well, because despite the increase in revenue and the uneven pattern that you talked about, clearly all your personnel and benefit costs were, below budget. So you continue to do the excellent job that you've always done in the past.
Thank you.
I'd like to add my comments too on that. I think, GEMS is doing a great job, and it's been a very difficult period, and we understand that, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm waiting for the motion.
If the motion's now in order, I would move that we recommend to the full BET the release of the conditions on these funds and that the item be a routine item.
Second?
I'll second. I'm not sure, can we have a release of funds be a routine item, or is it required as
No,
non-routine?
I think it will be non-routine because, is that?
No objection?
Those in favor? 400. Thank you so much.
Just want to say
Appreciate-
thank you to Mr. Raymer, if I may. It was a pleasure working with you in this budget capacity, especially being new in this position.
So years ago, I was a volunteer on the ambulance corps. There was no GEMS at that point. And in those days, there was no advanced life support. We did not have the telemetry that connected. It was mostly grab the poor bastard and get him to the hospital as soon as you can. So the save rates and the technology that's involved now for somebody who had the experience that I had, I think is a wow. I remember sitting in the back of the ambulance many times thinking to myself that if this town knew what little training and technology rides in the back of the ambulance, they would never tolerate it. So it's not a surprise that in the fullness of time, we have a GEMS and we have the operation that you have. It's the fulfillment of what needed to be done, and congratulations.
Yeah, I think it's congratulations to the board and to the management that you have implemented technology and everything else, as Jeff has commented. So, thank you. So I think we'll go back and do conservation.
Yes.
And we have Pat Sesto today with us. And this is a request for $13,700,000 additional appropriation for the coastal resiliency plan. And this is actually a capital request. So Pat, would you like to explain why you're here and why we need the additional funds?
The project began back in 2020, actually late 2019. By the time we got into our full swing of things, the state had shut down. Our consultants were not considered essential workers at the time. We lost that spring season of field investigation while the consultants put in the necessary applications to be deemed, if not essential workers, given permission to come to the state and to work.
Can you move the microphone closer to you? So I'm not sure your voice can be picked up.
Better?
I think so.
I think so, okay. So we did lose one season, but most of the overrun has come from a pivot that we had to sustain associated with COVID. Our original plan for public outreach was to have sessions in 3 different parts of the town for, I think there was going to be at least 2 sessions, one closer to the beginning of the formulation of the report and one closer towards the end. We were not able to have public meetings as anticipated. We had to switch and we did a virtual meeting last year where we had fine attendance, about 40 over a 2-night period, which for us 40 feels pretty good. And from that, what we learned from that meeting is there was not as much interest from the public to participate in crafting this. It seemed the needs were more towards putting information out. So we pivoted from the public outreach meetings and went over to a new service, which was to create a story map. A story map takes the reader through what the issues are, what the changes will be, how they affect Greenwich in particular, and then our various strategies for dealing with these changes. This will be a product that will go on to our website. So it is, rather than a report, which frankly, I don't have a whole lot of hope that members of the public were going to swoon to and read that. The story map, I think, is going to be actually a much better tool to educate the public. But it was a brand new item within the scope. We were hoping that through the iterations of being responsive to the changes that we had to make in order to get this report done, that things would balance out. We had a sense that probably not fully balance out because it never works that way. And then the last item was probably our bigger of the 2 overruns, came from more work needed, and this is actually a reflection of success, although it's hard when you have an overrun to feel like it's success. We had a very good team of department heads working with the consultants to really be specific about what it was they were putting forward and how to really in pretty good detail modify that to match what's literally happening in Greenwich. We had a plan of conservation and development, so we had planning and zoning, line by line. No, this is the way this needs to go. Amy in DPW has been extraordinary with the level of detail. And of course, her department has so much information about the structures in town. What have we actually have been seeing with flooding rather than theoretical, and bringing that to the report. So we had more revisions and consulting time one-on-one. So that accounts for the bigger of the pieces of the overrun.
So do we have any questions? Andy?
Thanks, Pat. This is really a question for Roland and Pete. To the extent that this incremental request is driven by COVID concerns or COVID COVID circumstances led to the request.
Contributed, for sure.
Contributed. Is there any possibility for getting relief from the feds for these incremental funds?
If I may, through you to Pat, did you talk to Ben Brannion about requesting reimbursement for ARP monies?
I actually had not thought that such a
Okay.
thing could be connected to this.
It's potential, yeah. I think, can you touch base with Ben Brannion and see if he could put you in the queue?
Okay,
Right.
sure.
Leslie?
If I read the documentation, the expenses have already been committed to. Is that correct? Have they been incurred, or are these expenses you're anticipating to incur?
In order to finish the project, we need these funds. So they have not been, so in some regards, yes, they've been spent because the story map has been made. But we're with the consultant now and the summary of the budget has said, we need these additional funds to finish the project. So they've kind of yes, but kind of no.
Right, so, because there are
Practically speaking.
two issues that it raises. One is the ARP process isn't going to be finished for several months, and it goes to the RTM, maybe the March RTM, maybe April. So if there are open invoices, does it wait that long? Second is just that, our processes are such that expenses shouldn't be incurred for projects where you don't have the funding already allocated. So all of this is a little bit more awkward, I guess, is the way to put it, than it would typically be. Because if these funds don't get approved, and it's a small amount of money, but if they don't get approved, then there's really no source for paying those bills that expenses have been committed to. The other question I wanted, or suggestion I would make, the documentation that you provided talks about $11,700 as being a dollar amount that you're short. The request is for $13,700. I believe you've added some contingency. Your documentation should be revised, I think, before, well, I don't know if there's time before it goes to the full BET, but it should be revised to add that there's $2,000 of contingency in there, so the numbers tie.
Tie, very good.
Leslie, I think that's a good point on the contingency, especially because, I think we've seen, this may be the third iteration of the blue sheet that we've seen. So I think that's a good point. But I do want to ask Roland and Pete a question. It's my understanding on ARP is that if the project has occurred since March 31st of this year, that we can reimburse our own funding for it if it's COVID related. And that's my understanding. So I think that's a little bit different than what Leslie said. But I do think it's well worthwhile following up with Ben, because where we have these federal funds available to us, we want to make sure that we utilize them, specifically for the type of projects that they're for. But this would fit into that profile as I understand it. So, I think the timing, but Ben would also have a good idea on that also. Leslie?
Just to follow up on the process, you're right about that. But this appropriation, if it were approved by the BET, would still need to go to the RTM in January. And then when the ARP funding comes through, it's explained that it will be reimbursing that $13,700 that the town authorized.
Yes, that's correct. And there may be other projects that are going to the RTM that will have some part of a similar story. So it might not be the only project like this, based on some of the other department projects that are being put forth into the ARP. But, again, this is premature. Leslie?
And this is not directly related, only because to the request you have, in the sense that you're now very far down the road with this first set of funding you had for the conservation funding. And can you give us a sense, I'm just curious, on the time frame of when that story map and that this first project is concluded? I know it's leading you to the second phase, which hasn't been funded in 2 years, but hopefully will be funded at some point. But where you are in the process and what you see needs to still be done.
Just to be sure that I understand the process, if the BET approves the additional funding, then I'm free to tell the consultant to go ahead and finish up, or that has
You
to
have
go
to
to the
wait for
RTM
RTM approval
January.
in January.
Okay, so it will not be done for the beginning of January, the way I had thought. They are ready to finish up. So as soon as we get the approvals, they will finish that out. As far as the next steps go, it is far enough down, the drafts are so close to completion that we know what it is, which has allowed us to then make the requests within our budget and projected years out projects based on what this report will be saying. And the story map is effectively done. We just need to pay for it. So this part of the process will define when the report will be done.
I mean, this is just a comment on next year's budget process, but I think the findings from this report are certainly going to be interesting to the BET and the public on
Hope so.
where we are and what, where things stand and what we need to do.
That's wonderful. It would be a shame if they weren't of interest, really.
So similarly to many other projects that we have, I would add here. So do we have a motion on this?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question.
Oh, I'm sorry. You didn't have your hand raised.
Sorry, my oversight. Roland, these funds are sourced from capital non-recurring. Is that typically what we do with? Okay. I mean, there's certainly plenty of funds there. It's useful to have.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
$11 million.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Sure, I'll make,
May I just, well, since you made that comment, I did ask Roland previously how we had funded this, the first 100,000, and that was in the bond fund. So like many other projects, we have a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And if we get COVID money, it's a little bit from yet another place. So going on, Jeff.
so I would make the motion that we approve this appropriation and recommend it for approval at the full BET. I ran afoul the last time, but I'm going to propose once again that this be a routine item.
Andy?
I second that. I also have an additional request here.
Okay,
Madam Chair.
and you're doing that as a... Well, we can recommend as routine, and then, of course, you can put it on as non-routine, Karen. Those, Andy?
Would you be able to speak with Ben before the BET meeting on Thursday? Just
Yes,
Okay.
yep, I'll go from here to there, and hopefully he's in.
Thank you.
That won't change the sheet, though, because the timing is such that
I understand.
Pat needs this money, and we would have to approve it, and it would have to go to the RTM. So, it's just a refunding as we do on other things. So those in favor of Jeff's and Andy's motion? Aye, 400. Okay, thank you so much, Pat.
So to be clear, since there's a potential this will not be there might be some discussion on Thursday on this, I should attend that meeting too.
Yes.
So.
Yes, I think that Karen Chairman has given the indication that this will be a non-routine item on their agenda. And so,
Be there.
be prepared. And I think we all would encourage you to visit Ben, as it's been said.
Like right now.
Jeff?
Nothing.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks,
So-
Pat.
So now we have TAG, and we have Mike Miller with us today for a release of conditions on the fourth quarter of the town's contribution to TAG. So you want to just update? We've seen you, I think, probably, is this our third visit in September? Third? And so if you can just give us a short...
October and now
Yeah, if
December.
you can just give us an update since October of, what might have changed since October. And also, I think people are interested in TAG's fundraising and the status of that.
Sure, I'm happy to. We continue with our forecast for $160,000 of fundraising revenues for the year. And at this point in time, we are on target with what we expect to achieve in the first half of the year, which is typically a little less than the second half of the year. We usually have our large fundraiser in the second half of the year, and much of our fundraising does take place between the months of December and March. We're also in the process of seeing additional upticks in our program fees, which is welcome because during COVID, we had quite a tremendous fall off in our program fees last year, under $200,000 from what would be a typical year of between $400,000 and $500,000. We're seeing several of our agencies moving towards pre-COVID levels of program activity, and we're also experiencing new businesses coming online as well, the largest of which is Pathways for us. This year we had some Pathways business, but it has been much larger, and we expect it to continue at a higher level for the remainder of this year. Additionally, townwide events, several of which were canceled in the prior year, or I should say postponed in the prior year. Those postponed events did take place in the fall, and we were able to support those events, two of which, the Greenwich Town Party and the Greenwich Concours, contributed greatly to our other revenues being substantially above where we expected them to be at this point. We do expect the 2022 events to take place on their original timeframes, so we do expect 2022 to come in where we were originally forecasting. So the combination of our increase in program fees and our healthy fundraising, leading into what we expect to be a good fundraising season throughout the spring of 2022, has been very helpful and moving us towards what we expect to be a slightly above break-even forecast for fiscal year 2022 ending in June. One of the items that we're waiting on and will be putting an application in for, as has been discussed with several others here today, is an application for ARP funding. And the ARP funding supports what we are doing with respect to food deliveries in the community. Prior to the pandemic, we were delivering to between 100 and 200 people in the community, a little over 50 households. Once the pandemic hit, that number went up dramatically as food insecurity became much greater in town. And so we've been, through last year, managing at about 500 households delivering food as part of our Feed Greenwich food delivery program in concert with our food pantry, Neighbor to Neighbor, and with the Department of Human Services. We had expected those numbers to continue to decline after the Delta variant had worked its way through, and they have in fact been declining. We're down to about 430 households now per week delivering. And our expectation was once the pantry, Neighbor to Neighbor, moved into their new location, that we would drop those numbers to about 225 as more residents would be coming to pick up their food curbside. It now looks like the transition to the new facility on the Christchurch campus will be pushed back at a minimum through the end of the first quarter and possibly beyond. And with that, our expected food deliveries will probably remain at the current level for the foreseeable future, possibly all the way through this year. It all depends on the timing of when the move takes place and the level of food insecurity in town. Now that Omicron is hitting, it's a little difficult to tell what impact that may have as well. But right now, we're just looking at the impact of the move and the fact that it's taking a little longer than expected. With respect to, and so for that, we have expected that we would need about $130,000 from the ARP program to help support the food deliveries this year, because there's no budgeted program fees through any agency in the town to support that. And so, to the extent that there are additional deliveries, additional households on average in the second half of the year, once we have the ability to update our forecast, we'll adjust that ARP request accordingly. And I believe the timetable that we've received from the application is sometime in January to submit the application. So we will certainly submit that with the most updated information that we have at that point with our expected food deliveries for the remainder of this year.
So may I just ask, so there's no revenue stream at all connected with the neighbor-to-neighbor food deliveries?
Prior to pre-COVID, when we had approximately 50 households, a little under 200 people that we were delivering to, the program fees that we received from the Department of Human Services totaled $25,000, and that was a pre-COVID number. That partially compensates TAG for the total amount of food deliveries. The remainder of that would come through either partially town funding and partially fundraising that TAG would allocate towards that. There was never, once COVID hit and food deliveries spiked, there was never put in place a mechanism for additional funding to support the additional level of food deliveries. And so for each period of time that we've had to work towards finding funding, it's either been government funding or additional fundraising that TAG has done, but there's never been an additional amount coming from, for example, the Department of Human Services or any other agency in town specifically devoted towards offsetting the costs of these additional food deliveries above pre-pandemic.
So it seems to me that, that opportunity for community development block grants that occurred earlier, when they had the second set, I think you did apply for the first set, that probably would have been an appropriate time to, given this, working with Human Services.
We did ask at that point in time, and we're told that the vast majority of the block grant is devoted to capital expenditures.
No, there was special COVID money. I thought that was.
Oh, no, we went through special COVID
You
money.
did the first, I think,
We
but
did
not
both.
the second
We did
one.
both the first and the second. We actually did. The first one, we were awarded $96,000, and the second one, we were awarded $65,000. So we did receive funding on both, and that did go towards defraying the costs of the food deliveries. We had well over 6,000 hours of service devoted to food deliveries last year. This year, we had planned about 3,500 hours. It's probably going to come in at over 4,000 this year. So.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Jeff?
If I can, and looking at page CF2, in the July column, the $65,000 under Feed Greenwich, that's the $65,000 that came through the Community Development Block Grant money. And looking out to April of the coming term, the 130 you're showing there, that's your aspiration for that funding from the ARP funds, right?
That would be the ARP fund request should we actually experience a reduction down to about 225 households by about January. That was the original plan expectation, but if it remains at 430, it's likely that number would rise since our expense base would rise.
Still on the same page in the expense columns, you're showing over the 5 months so far in the current fiscal year that you incurred about $11,000 worth of costs for maintenance and repairs. But looking forward to the 7 months that follow, you're showing in most of the months the expectation of zero, which surprised me. Is that a realistic concern? a realistic anticipation?
Yes, it actually is. The bulk of our maintenance and repairs is normal and recurring, as opposed to in previous years when we had an older fleet, stuff would happen. Now that we have rehabbed or turned over our entire fleet, our expectation for maintenance and repairs costs are very low for the remainder of the year. We just had to do our annual expected maintenance on a variety of the vehicles earlier in the year.
So that's the $11,000 that you incurred over the first 5 months.
Right.
And you're expecting to have little or nothing over the 7 months to come?
We expect to have a little bit of, recurring tires and other things,
Right.
but not a heck of a lot.
In the fundraising, you're showing figures for the first 5 months of the year that move around some depending upon whether or not you did a major fundraising in that month. But in general, you're averaging over the course of those 5 months about $11,000 and change. Looking forward to the next 7 months, where you're projecting on average just slightly under $15,000 a month. The same question, is that a realistic expectation? Are you actually expecting your fundraising to rise by about 50% for the next 7 months compared to the last 5 months?
If we take a look at previous years and the timing of when our fundraising occurs, this would be very consistent with those levels.
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry, and then lastly, are you still running about the same personnel? Have you done any reductions in your personnel, or?
Yes, our expectation is that as we go forward with the reduction of food deliveries, and again, this is subject to change, but with the reduction of food deliveries roughly around January, our expectation is that related payroll and benefits for the lower service hours would be reflected in our forecast as lower than where we are currently. But again, that is subject to change once we have updated expectations of what our food deliveries will be for the remainder of the year.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Andy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. To go back to the ARP monies, which are in the schedule at $130,000. If there was not an ARP program, would you run the business a little bit differently, or would you just have a higher deficit at your end?
So essentially, what we have always done, at least I should say, for the past 4 years or so, is look at running TAG as a break-even or slightly ahead of break-even operation. And it's reflective of what needs can TAG fill in the community at the opportunity that TAG has to fundraise in order to meet those needs. And one of the largest contributors to the need for the $130,000, or the largest item that $130,000 is required for, is for food delivery in the community. Pandemic crisis response food delivery. To the extent that this is a service that is necessary and continuing in the community, we will speak with everyone and anyone in the community to determine the best way that we can meet that need in the community. At this point in time, it looks like ARP funds would be a wonderful source to help us meet the need in the community for this food delivery. To the extent that it was not available, we would certainly meet with other members of the community to figure out other ways. But at this point, we've discussed that with members of the ARP community, and they feel that this is a worthwhile endeavor for us to put on the ARP plate.
Perhaps. I'm a little bit concerned that you got ahead of yourselves making these commitments when these ARP funds, it's not guaranteed. There are a lot of people who are requesting these funds, and it's just a limited amount of dollars available that we could distribute. So I just want to make sure you're mindful of that.
Well, we're very mindful of that, and we haven't made the commitments. The commitment that we've made is to the extent that the funding's available, we are available to meet the need in the community at the level of food insecurity that currently exists. To the extent that we require additional fundings from other sources, we'll make everyone in the community aware of that, and we'll try and meet that need as best we can.
Okay, so we do have a motion, or Leslie?
If I could just follow up a little bit, and I don't think any of our questions are highlighting anything you don't already know. Some of your clients that you had before COVID have now found other ways to provide services. You're still predicting that the Board of Education will be of need of your services going forward, though they haven't had that in the first part of the year. You've talked about new clients, and so you're still working the business and the revenue mix so you can get to that goal of break even if you accept, take and put aside the extraordinary service level you're providing for the Feed Greenwich program. And so the question that you have, I'm sure, and we have, I'm sure, is, getting comfortable that that mix of break even actually works, because for town planning, the past few years, you've needed additional funds, and worthwhile service, you've gotten the additional funds. Certainly, it's better to know what the plan is ahead of the game rather than the end of the year after the situation's known. So, come February, when we're talking budget again, I think that there's going to be a little bit more discussion over really that, both of us understanding what that business plan is and that revenue mix, and is it still working in the same way that you anticipate it to work?
And I think that's a valid question, and it's something that we've been discussing internally. And what our response to that is, we had a business mix prior to COVID that was essentially 90%, or should I say 10% food delivery business, or pantry delivery business. Sometimes we would bring people to the pantry. Sometimes we would bring food and or clothing from the pantry to individuals in the community. That business mix changed tremendously when the agencies that were affected by the crisis when it first hit the community closed or reduced their programs tremendously. That was never expected that it would be permanent, although for some agencies it may be for the foreseeable future or permanently. But as we leave COVID, and by leaving COVID, I mean experience a new normal. We are not going to leave COVID. The new normal for TAG will likely be somewhere around a 50-50 mix, whereas previously it was 90-10 non-food delivery, 10% food delivery. Based on what we're seeing, and based on the fact that this need in the community, even if it reduces to the level that we thought of about 225 households, that's still over 4 times the level that we were providing pre-COVID. So we're expecting more of a 50-50 mix, and it might be a little more or a little less, but that is our expectation going forward. And when we do sit down to meet for our plan, that's what we're going to be talking about. How are we moving from where we are today, which is still responding to the crisis, to a post-COVID environment where we still have a much higher level of food insecurity in the community than it was pre-COVID? And how do we meet that need with available funds, such as they are, as well as service the other 50% of our service hours going to non-food delivery, which we believe we have an ability to meet those needs with our existing fundraising attributes and existing contribution from the town.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's
it's just a
gonna
matter
be-
of where, what will those numbers be in terms of where we spend our service hours, 10,000 service hours in the community, and where will the funding come for that additional piece of food delivery? Do we change and have some kind of new annual program fees from a source that didn't exist during COVID, or not? Or do we look at that and say, maybe we do have to reduce to a lower level to match it with our existing
And
non-COVID?
it's a town question too, right? Because
of
what's
course.
the service that's being provided and how best to fund it? Is it totally an
Absolutely.
independent external entity job to find that funding? Is it partly a town responsibility? Is it a fundraising responsibility? They're all big questions with lots of different answers to it.
And that's what we're grappling with, and
Yeah.
we'll certainly have that discussion when we go and meet with the BET during the planning process.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I just add to Leslie's comments that I think we need to look at it, or Ben, someone more in a whole, in terms of the other departments where we've had revenue sources coming towards TAG too, just to make sure there's a full understanding at the next fiscal year. So do I have a motion now to
If I
to
can.
release
Well,
funds?
In a moment, if I can offer a comment.
Certainly.
It needs to be acknowledged that this was a delicate balance operation for years, which was wrapped heavily around the state contract to be providing transportation, which the state then awarded to a different vendor. And we have to recognize the rescue that was done by Mr. Miller and by Ms. Vetchermile and others to try and find a new balance and new formulation to make the thing work. It's an important process for us, what's being done by TAG. I mean, the fact that this was an agency that was able to step in and do the food distribution when COVID hit is itself remarkable. A heavy storm hits, and at 12 o'clock in the morning, the police chief makes a phone call that he believes that there's residents of an elderly housing facility that are in danger, and TAG responds in the wee hours of the morning and removes the residents. These are things that the town needs to remember how important this agency is. The funding is not yet in balance. There's still a scrambling going on. I think everybody in the room understands that. I just feel like people need to remember that while we're busy scrambling and looking to see how it's done at the same time, there are some valuable and urgent things that are being done by TAG that I don't know how they would be done if there were no TAG here. So we need to find solutions to these things, but we do need to remember how important the agency is to us. With that said, I would make a motion that we approve this item. I hesitate to call it a routine item. Maybe I'll ask it that it be a non-routine item. That
I'm sorry,
recommend
that you
to
recommend this is.
the release of
the-
funding
okay.
to the full BET.
And as non-routine, right? Or do you want, I
So
think
far, every
it
time I
should be
said routine, it
routine.
got changed. So I think I'm going to
it
say
should be
non-routine.
I'd say routine,
I'd agree with that, and I'll second that motion.
as routine.
I would, yes.
So Jeff and Leslie,
Right.
and those in favor?
Aye.
I'm sorry, did you want to?
I'm going to vote against that. I don't think I think we need to think very carefully about this going forward. We're releasing the remaining funds for the balance of the fiscal year today, or recommending it on Thursday anyway. And there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I think we need to recognize that this is going to require, despite the comments that Jeff made, and they're very good. You've done some very good things, but this is a very expensive delivery service, and I just think we need to be mindful. And I don't think this is routine at all for Thursday, but it's up to the chair.
Would you vote against it if it were a non-routine? The release of funds, I just look at the cash flow. They can't pay their bills unless they get this funding.
And they will, return
I-
within 2 months.
Well, my point is I want it to be a non-routine. So
Okay, well.
if I could ask to amend the,
Yeah, of course you can. So
Our normal habit at the BET is that the body respects a request of any member, from any member, that a routine item be made non-routine. So I think that that's likely to happen, but I would be glad to amend my motion to the way it was when I first stated it, that we recommend the release of this funding and call the item non-routine. And I'll glance over in Karen's direction to see what that's happening there.
And Leslie, or do you?
And I'll agree with that change as the
Okay,
seconder.
so now I'll call the vote again.
In favor?
in favor, sorry.
400. Thank you very much. So thank you, Mr. Miller. Happy holidays.
Yes.
Happy
thank
holidays
you.
to
And thank you for all you do.
And it's a pleasure to be able to serve the community in the way we have. And it's a pleasure to have the partnership of the BET as part of this, because I've said this many times, but I'll continue to say it, we could not do what we currently do without the full support of the BET. And so greatly appreciate it.
Are you still looking for board members? Particularly
we ha-
ones that are good at doing fundraising and putting together
We would
events?
welcome anyone who would be interested in helping serve the community through TAG. We have an increase in our board membership, but we're still looking for one or two
So
additional
I'm just
members.
giving some hints. Mr. Borsick is sitting behind you, and he might want to put in his little article, if he's going to do one, that, it'd be great if some people who have fundraising experience or like to do events would consider the TAG board.
So again, thank you all very much, and in particular, thank you for those kind comments. And to Mr. Deuce, we hope to be able to sway you and anyone else who has similar thoughts, just so that you're aware, in several years past, the reason for the accelerated funding from the town is when we take a look at all of our non-programmatic funding sources, the timing of our fundraising is typically back-ended loaded. So typically, the town funding, in previous years, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, TAG used to receive 100% of its funds at the beginning of the fiscal year. That was moved to a semi-annual or quarterly basis, and that created some difficulties because the other funding of TAG didn't really change its seasonality. So had the town continued with 100% upfront, there never would be this need to talk about it, but we understand the town was looking to better align its funding over the course of the year. We settled upon a 50% beginning of the year, 50% through mid-year. We found that would get us close, but as a result, again, of our non-program funding taking place later in the year, there was a need to accelerate in some years this funding a little ahead. So that's the reason.
So thank you so much, Mr. Miller, for your additional comments, and we'll move on and ask Roland to give us an update on the economic conditions. So you have some good news for us, Roland?
Well, conveyance and building permits continue to do quite well. In fact, conveyance went up to $770,000 this year. We had one large sale, and that was the 599 West Putnam Avenue.
And do we have any idea what that?
That was $140,000.
Wow. So this is great. So good progress on that front, and good progress on building permits are still very high for a November quarter, for our December reporting period, almost double what we get in previous Decembers pre-COVID.
If we adjust last year's revenues and take out the employee healthcare contribution, we're actually $6.8 million ahead of last year's collections, of which most of it is taxes, $4.5 million. And bridges are up $1 million. Building permits and tipping fees got off to a slow start last year. So we're $400,000 ahead in tipping fees, and those make up the bulk of the difference.
That's great, Roland. That's really super.
In the case of the expenses, it's the same items we spoke about last month. The pension, which we pay in July, is up $2 million. We transferred more over to the capital funding. We were paying over $8 million for projects out of the tax levy. Last year, we only did $4.5 million. And we also have the $3 million or $4 million of cybersecurity that we moved into, or not just cyber, but capital, we moved into operating, which is coming through the budget as well. So we're running pretty much as planned on the expense side. And Nathaniel Witherall, through 5 months, is in the black, I guess, $348,000, which is
Wow. And, I'm sorry? Oh. So those are good, solid reports, Roland. I think we're, a lot of good work by the departments and a lot of good planning work by the Budget Committee and the BET. Mr. Deuce?
Roland, on the revenue schedule, if you go back to the Nathaniel Witherall numbers, there's no page number there.
Yes.
The difference is shown as a negative. Do I have it backwards?
Well, no, I just got the Nathaniel Witherall November numbers late last night, so I adjusted them manually, and it didn't subtract across properly.
Okay, so it's a positive difference.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's good news. Any more questions, or should we move on? Move on?
I was just looking at the components of the, you can move on.
I'd just like to make a comment, which I normally do at this point in time, about the BLS inflation rate. This Consumer Price Index for area prices went up 0.3% over the month, which is not our highest recent month, but it's certainly a warning. And, but we are definitely having the highest 5.0% over the year that we've seen in so very long. So, you know, this is a little, well, we'll just keep on watching this every month as we have been, I think. That's, Mr. Raymer.
In connection with that, Pete, probably I should be, just wait till I get the treasurer's report for the BET, but I was just wondering, so with the interest-based investments that we have, are they generally speaking short-term, that we could expect that the inflation rate will begin to reflect higher return on some of the interest return, or are we locked into longer-term interest-bearing investments?
The Treasury program is frozen. The rates are too low. The CD program, we don't have any new investments. There's still, we do still have some higher rates that were 18 months and longer before. All the operating funds in the banks there's no movement. And it's all reflected in the Treasurer's report, which we'll
We'll
get
look at
tomorrow.
in a day or so.
Yeah, but we haven't seen any increase. It's
We only
very
get it-
immaterial.
We only get it on the pay
I-
side, not on the receipt side.
It'd be interesting in February if you, when we budget $500,000 for interest income in the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be an interesting conversation then, and we'll have a lot more information to see if there is impact
Sure.
because of that.
Sure, thank you, Pete.
And that also conversely, that let's hope that we get low interest rates when we go to market on January 5th on the expense side.
No.
So there's always a good news, bad news story to this.
I like your optimism, okay?
But
Thank you.
I think that, you know, just looking year over year at our low interest income that in Roland's first page of his report, you know, it's even only half of last year and a quarter of the year before. So anyway, so we'll move on. So our next item is the approval of the BET Budget Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of November 18.
So Leslie, and do I have a second? Andy Dews?
Andy seconds.
So those in favor? Aye. Okay, so that vote is 4-0-0. Do I have a motion to add any additional minutes to the meeting? Leslie?
I'll make a motion to add the minutes for the, it's March 5th Consolidation Day, no, March 8th Consolidation Day 2, and then
No, I don't think that's the right day. I think it's,
forget the dates. Consolidation Day 2 for fiscal 22 budget, and decision days 1 and 2 for the fiscal 22 budget.
okay, do I have a second to that motion?
Second. This is the motion to add it to the agenda, yes?
This is a motion to add to the agenda. So moved by Leslie and seconded by Jeff. Those in favor?
Aye. Or two-thirds vote, we're 4-0, right?
4-0-0 is the vote.
Madam Chair, I don't think
I'm sorry?
I was present on the Budget Committee for the first of those days.
You weren't? Where were you?
For the motion for
You voted for, you voted for those days.
Hang on.
No, we're talking about March of this year.
Was it March?
And Andy's
Okay.
votes were all there.
It was March, sorry. Yeah, my name's all over it, sorry. Never mind.
In any event, the motion.
And your
the motion
sweat
to
and
add
your,
to the agenda. You don't have to be present at those meetings to add to the agenda.
Okay, so now that we've gotten through that hurdle, is there a motion to approve the minutes for the consolidation day number 2 and decision days 1 and 2?
I'll make that motion.
So made by Leslie Moriarty. Andy seconds. Andy Dews seconds it. Those in favor?
Aye.
4-0-0. Okay, so
Can I raise one other issue for discussion?
certainly.
On our agenda, it refers to our January meeting being on January 11th at 5 PM. Just want to have the discussion whether the members of the committee want to revise that to be 1 PM. I know there's ongoing discussion about when's the best time to have the meeting, but now it's time we're publicly identifying when our next meeting is. I think 1 PM works better, certainly for the department heads that come before us, and will allow us to pivot to a Zoom environment more easily if we're during the day, if necessary.
And do you have any comments from Jeff?
Only to remind Leslie that.
And is your,
I have no objection to that. It would require that we move some liaison meetings that affect Leslie Tarkington and I, but those can be easily moved. And I have no objection to that change.
Andy?
I don't think I should comment. I won't be here.
Yeah, I think, quite frankly, I think that making this comment publicly is worthwhile. And, before we all set up these meetings in early September, I did, talk about times, et cetera, with certainly Pete Minarski, Roland Geiger, and Ben Branyan. He speaking mostly for the department heads. And there was a strong preference for 1 o'clock. I think that the meetings have gone very well at that point in time. I think given the, basically, who would normally attend, whether it was at 5 o'clock or at 1 o'clock, I don't think it seems to change the participation. My response, though, would be that it should continue to be published at 5 o'clock. And like all committee meetings, that this, as soon as the new budget committee is identified, that committee determined the best time, certainly for the January meeting, if not all the meetings. But I think that the 1 o'clock has worked very productively in town hall, and I think it's, gathered a lot of enthusiasm. It may save the town money because we don't end up compensating many of the people who come here who either get overtime or they get compensatory time, depending on their nature of their representative group. So, but I hear your comments, but I don't think since, I have no idea who's going to be on the budget committee, I don't think it's appropriate at this point in time to change the published date, but it's certainly something that those of us who remain can speak to those who are going to be on the committee and certainly provide our views, whatever they are. So I thank you, Leslie, for raising that point. I'd like to take the liberty of making a few comments myself, if
I
possible.
think that Andy and I actually might prefer to set the meeting for 6 a.m. What do you think?
I second that.
That might work for me, actually, guys. May I make a few comments or not?
Please.
Okay. So I guess what we're saying now is that the BET Budget Committee 2020-2021 term is coming to a close. I'm very grateful and proud of the accomplishments of this Budget Committee with the support of Finance. We unanimously approved the fiscal year 21 budget as the fiscal year 20 budget as the COVID-19 pandemic began. We unanimously approved 2 separate sets of budget guidelines, both within the COVID pandemic and the Zoom environment. We approved the fiscal year 22 budget that we are now within. We approved numerous millions of dollars of additional federal and state-funded COVID grant appropriations for town departments to operate. Again, this is outside of our budgets. The committee began in-person meetings on January 26th of this year, socially distanced and with masks. Until September, all meetings were hybrid Zoom also, always on Channel 24, 79, and YouTube, with support of the town's IT staff and leadership of Channel 79. We had a change about a quarter into our term of a new Budget Committee member, with Deborah Hesse stepping down, and very appreciatively, with Andy joining in October of 2020. We had 2 snow days during the fiscal year 22 budget cycle, which I think was a first. One meeting was canceled. The other announced that solely the Budget Committee would work in Town Hall until they sent us home. Our meeting continued. Throughout all of this, it was special to work with you, Leslie, Jeff, and Andy. I am most grateful for your dedication to the town, to the BET, to the Budget Committee, and for your cooperative input and friendships. Budget Committee accomplishments are made with the wise counsel and support of Pete and Roland, and their friendships too. So I thank each of you, as well as our chairs of the BET and our BET colleagues who offer constructive input and assistance. So I'm wishing you happy and healthy holidays. Thank you.
And you too.
Thank you. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I would move the adjournment.
So at 2:13, Jeff moved to adjourn. And do we have a
Next
second?
meeting.
Andy seconds that.
So Jeff and Andy. And those in favor, aye. Thank you.